Ladies and gentlemen, our final panel of the evening is titled The Charleston Experience. Please welcome the moderator, Bo Moore, the Dean of the School of Humanities at the Citadel, and the panelists that include City of Charleston Deputy Chief Naomi Broughton, Reverend Joe Darby, wife of the late Reverend Clementa Pinckney, Jennifer Pinckney, the former Charleston Mayor, Joe Riley, and the daughter of the late Ethel Lee Lance, Reverend Sharon Risher.
The lights are bright. Panelists, audience, welcome to our session on the Charleston Experience, an experience that is now nearly 350 years old and has often been a significant shaping force in our larger American experience. Most of us in this room can trace our roots to Europe or to Africa or to both. Here in this new land, our ancestors, black and white, grew into one people, in many ways united and drawn close together by the joy of a distinctive American culture that they built together, and yet, in many other ways, divided and kept apart by slavery and its enduring legacies. Fully bridging that gap between us to make us whole has been one of the greatest leadership challenges facing our country and our community from its birth to the present. Tim Tyson, one current historian of our ongoing American dilemma, wrote, "What strikes me now is how much of the painful past we have yet to confront, even when we love one another and think that we know one another. So much of what agonizes and divides us remains unacknowledged. We are runaway slaves from our own past, and only by turning to face the hounds can we find our freedom beyond them." 2 years ago, the hounds came to Charleston. When they appeared, the citizens of this city in which the Civil War began stopped running, turned together as one, and faced them with an unprecedented display of concern for one another that earned international acclaim and for Mother Emanuel a nomination for a Nobel Prize in Peace. We believe that the lessons in leadership provided by that remarkable turn of events can strengthen the ties that bind us together and empower us to expand the boundaries of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for those who follow. This evening's panel will seek to identify and analyze some of those lessons, and I need not tell you that it will be done by some of the key leaders in that experience that was all too painful. So what I propose to do is to propose to our panelists a series of 3 questions that deal in different ways with that subject, and then ask them to address those questions and those issues in whatever order and in whatever manner they think best. So first, panelists, why didn't the heinous act of racial violence at Mother Emanuel spawn widespread civil disorder in Charleston and other parts of South Carolina as lesser acts of racial violence did in other American cities?
I believe we're in the Holy City. I believe from my spiritual understanding that because of the spiritual hearts of Charlestonians, understanding that God played a big part, I believe, in my understanding of orchestrating how we would react. That God needed Charleston to be that role model to show the nation that we could get past this horrific thing if we would bring the minds and hearts of a spiritualness to this tragedy that would be a role model. I truly believe that.
I also believe that I look at Clementa, and he was being the spiritual leader. He was not about hate. He was about love. He was about unity and coming together. And those who knew him and worship under him, you know, that's what he preached about. That's what he talked about. Even the people that in the communities, in his district and so forth, he was about coming together. He was about love. And that's the same thing that it extended not only from home as him growing up as a youngster, from his parents teaching him that, to something that we instill in our daughters and that I still do today, but it was just an extension, and that was an extension of him too.
I think a piece of it too, and it's something that's in the DNA of South Carolina and Charleston in particular, is an agonizing and raging politeness. We do not like to offend each other. We do not like to do anything rude. That's a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, it means that we overlook some stuff that we need to confront. But it also means that when things like this happen, you don't get that same kind of civil disobedience that you get in other places. It's just not in our state's DNA.
Well, I'd like to say that I think there were three key elements that led to peaceful resolution, and that was planning, collaboration, and leadership. And I'll go back to planning, which as a deputy chief with the police department, that's probably one of the most essential assets on the job. But in early 2014, Chief Mullen had asked his command staff, what are we going to do in Charleston when we have a mass casualty incident? As you know, most police departments are reactionary, so you wait till the event happens, not with Chief Mullen. He expected us to devise a roadmap, a blueprint for what we were going to do when this happened in Charleston. This was 2014. We got together with our federal partners from the FBI, who unfortunately had a great deal of experience, Columbine, Aurora, Sandy Hook. And we, with them, trained and devised a roadmap for what we would do to assist our victims, to assist our residents, our business partners, when this happened in Charleston. We worked diligently to develop a field guide that would give us some kind of guidance for when this happened. And 2 years ago, we put it in play. And it worked beautifully. We were able to provide our victims wonderful, wonderful refuge from this horrific event. We were able to put in a room city, county, state, federal. That's a lot of ego in a room. We were able to put it together, and we were able to work together to work not only to provide assistance for our victims, but to provide the most professional investigation that led to the apprehension in a very short time. All that would not be possible if we didn't have the forgiveness from the very beginning of the families who nationwide told everybody that's how Charleston was going to handle it. Our planning, our collaboration, and then most of all, the leadership of Chief Greg Mullen, Mayor Joe Riley, and our city council, we were able to work our event to provide those services and to come to a very quick resolution to the apprehension of that suspect.
Thank you, and I concur with my fellow panelists and what they said. And before I forget, at the beginning, at 5 o'clock, we publicly, Mayor Tecklenburg wonderfully publicly recognized the person responsible for this, and a lot of people weren't there yet, and that is Brian Duffy. That was his idea. He worked tirelessly for 2 years with help of a lot of people. Brian's right over there. Brian, stand, and let's get another well-deserved recognition. Horrific events, disasters catch you where you are. At that moment when it happens, it's too late to plan, it's too late to organize. You've got what you have right then. And this community and the citizens of this community for many years worked together to build bridges of affection and respect and unity and understanding. And you know, in a city, it's like a family relationship or a friend relationship. You must always be alert to slights or damaged feelings or unfairness and address those positively. So this community and a host of organizations and people and leaders and citizens have been working that way so that this city did not have severe pockets of alienation. There weren't areas that were disaffected or had been ignored. And so when this most heartbreaking, horrific events occurred, that it's like, as I've said, that if you're mad because something happened, you don't light a fire in your own home. And this community, I feel, was together. And so our hearts broke together, and citizens naturally reacted by finding somebody to hug, finding someone, tears to wipe away, to hold hands, to pray, to join together, black and white, young and old, rich and poor. It was that foundational zeal and commitment of our community to build those bridges that I believe allowed us to withstand this most horrific event without being self-destructive.
A quick follow-up, maybe. In hindsight, is there anything that you wish had been done differently? Any difference in the response of the community or the city government?
No. You know, one thing that the Major mentioned, Assistant Chief mentioned, that the planning that night, 9:05 was the call, active shooter, and at 11:35 or so, there was assembled around the corner of the Embassy Suites about 200 family members that had been, because of this protocol. And so before the press conference was at 12:20 a.m. in the morning, so 11:30, for anyone knew, the press didn't know the degree of the tragedy. We had the families together to give them the sad news and to have that time to hold hands and to pray and to weep and to get together, and then they could call out to their family members, so that when the news broke, those most deeply affected had been warned or advised and had a chance to get their emotional feet slightly more stably on the ground.
Reverend Darby, a theological question, which I think is in your power alley.
Yeah, go ahead.
You know, obviously the bond hearing was just the highest form of drama. Does the Christian faith require forgiveness even when there's been no repentance or act of contrition?
Yes. You would not believe it listening to some of what passes for Christian and right today, which is neither Christian nor right. But forgiveness is a benchmark of Christianity. If we are authentic in our faith, then we say that our Savior forgave those who executed him. we are therefore to do likewise. I think you add to that the African American faith tradition of having to survive first in slavery and then in a condition after slavery where you could be brutalized, raped, killed, have your children sold. How do you cope with that? You learn to forgive and you move on.
However,
We have a dissent here?
yes, not so much of dissent, but just actually being authentic. Even though I am of the clergy membership, I am still wrestling with forgiveness. I was in Dallas, Texas, watching the news of the arraignment. And when I heard the first act of forgiveness, I screamed. I hadn't had a chance to even process what had happened to my mother, my two cousins, and my childhood friends. My brains was not at a point where I was ready to forgive. I still struggle with forgiveness today. I'm not where I was. The anger that I felt in the beginning of 2 years ago have subsided much, but I am choosing to allow myself to go through a spiritual process of being authentic, knowing that my faith, my beliefs will get me there, but I'm gonna say I was not on the forgiveness bandwagon when it happened. And I'm gonna continue to allow myself to be truthful about that and not to feel that I'm in a box by myself.
When President Obama delivered his masterful address at TD Arena, which I think without question was a masterpiece of American rhetoric, he said in part, "None of us can or should expect a transformation in race relations overnight. People of goodwill will continue to debate the merits of various policies, as our democracy requires, and there are good people on both sides of these debates. Whatever solutions we find will necessarily be incomplete. But it would be a betrayal of everything Reverend Pinckney stood for if we allowed ourselves to slip into a comfortable silence again. To settle for symbolic gestures without following up with the hard work of more lasting change, that's how we lose our way again." So, my second question, with that thought in mind, panelists, what have we done over the last 2 years to help guard against losing our way again? Or perhaps framed slightly differently, how much progress do you think we've made since June of 2015 in narrowing racial divisions within our community, and what areas in your mind are particularly notable?
I think we've thrown our arms around the Mother Emanuel family. I think that we have talked very much about peace and forgiveness. I think it still remains to be seen 2 years after the fact, though, whether or not we're just in a long, protracted, feel-good kumbaya moment, okay? Schools in Charleston County are still filled with racial disparities, both in equipment and in suspensions and in academics. There's a brain drain of young black people who go to college, get their degrees, and don't come back to Charleston because they can't find jobs in Charleston. We still get plenty of complaints about racial profiling from all of the three major law enforcement agencies and the NAACP office. Gentrification is still pushing some folks off the peninsula. We still have a long way to go to not just have had a good, feel-good time. We need to buckle down and remember that scripture from my faith tradition that says faith without works is dead. We need to do some work together.
Also, one thing that I can say that I've noticed too is that since the Confederate flag has come down, I see more people riding around with Confederate bumper stickers, and flags flying behind their cars and so forth. I still think that we still have a long ways to go, that we're not there yet. I see issues in schools. I see where kids are called out of their name. Kids are being bullied and so forth. So yeah, we're not where we should be, and it's sad that it took this tragedy for the flag to come down. It's sad that it took this tragedy for the positive things that have happened in South Carolina to happen. A lot of us, we have a tendency to talk about the problem, and that's all we want to do is talk about the problem and continue to talk about the problem, but we never want to get down into the muck and the grime of it and actually solve it. We can't always sit on the mountaintop. We got to get down and we got to work with the people. But we have to find out what the problem is. And once we find out what the problem is, then we can then begin to solve it. But if you have everyone just wanting to talk about it, then we're never going to get anywhere. And we're going to continue to have panels like this that's just always talking and no one doing anything.
The Confederate flag coming down was a good thing. There's a difference, though, between the flag coming down and dealing with the Confederates that are still in the building where the flag was.
Well, I think from the city's perspective and the police perspective, after Mother Emanuel, we had quite a few issues that were being brought up, and one of those was the flag was certainly one of the issues. We had to provide an arena for many groups who wanted to come and exercise their constitutional right of free speech. Some of those were very heated debates, but I think a lot of our success was, number one, our faith-based community didn't allow those outsiders to come and bring havoc to our city. And one of the unique things that we do at the police department that I don't think you'll find in any other organization is we personally reach out to any organization that would like to come to Charleston. Charleston now is a platform for people to have free speech. And we tell them what we expect of them. We explain the permitting process. We explain what we expect of them, and then ask what they're going to do. We have a dialogue that most organizations don't have. We have to communicate whether we believe what those organizations stand for or not. You got to talk to each other. And I think that we're unique that we do that. And one of the most amazing things I've seen in 35 years of law enforcement is we have a program called Coffee with a Cop, where we go to restaurants and we have anybody can come in and talk to us. And about 4 months ago, we had one of those programs, and in walked one person who's been in quite a few heated demonstrations in Charleston. But this individual felt comfortable to sit down at a table with the police department and talk about his issues. That doesn't happen in other places. That happens in Charleston, and it happens because we're willing to go to that extra level to reach out, to communicate, to talk about what's going to happen at these events, and ensure a safe environment for our residents, our citizens, our businesses, as well as all those organizations who want free speech.
I think without any question, the community's response, the church, the families, the community's response, and the communal collective heartbreak, that moved Charleston and this community and I believe our state in a more positive direction, not straight up, but in terms of racial progress and understanding. But we have to sustain it, and there's lots of work to do. And I'll speak just briefly on why we are working so hard to, and are going to, build the International African American Museum at Gadsden's Wharf here in Charleston. And President Obama's eulogy at Senator Pinckney's funeral, in that he said that Senator Pinckney often said that across the South we understand or appreciate history, but we haven't always understood or shared each other's history. And there's a structural defect in America, and that is this, that our country has never been confronted with or reconciled with enslavement of people in Africa and being brought here, and we haven't talked about it, we don't understand it, we haven't studied it in our schools, and what life was like to be a human being captured in Africa, put in the bottom of slave ships, horrific circumstances, and brought here and sold like a piece of property, and then the ensuing travails. And so that's why this museum is so important. It's not a building we're building. We're on this, 48% of all enslaved Africans came to North America. 48% came to Charleston. And where they arrive for the most part is where this institution will be built. So what we will be creating for America and for the world, certainly for us here, we will be creating a place that will present for the first time for most of us a history that is just as important for us to understand as the history of the Mayflower that we all learned in school growing up, and then the steps of that travail of enslavement, of working in rice fields and cotton plantations, and the real truth of all of that, and then the Jim Crow and all of the challenges that will be presented, so that then we all understand each other's history, and then we embrace it, and then we're more comfortable discussing it and dealing with it, and that is a structural, foundational strengthening that this institution, which will be a gift to America, will give, and it will certainly allow Charleston and the citizens of our city now and the future to be much more stably positioned to understand, care for, and treat each other equally.
I don't live in Charleston, and I haven't lived in Charleston in years. But one thing I have noticed through social media and news is that I believe the local communities have finally found their voices and being able to let the larger city know how they feel. I believe that the actions of our Moms Demand Action on our gun violence prevention, the communities coming together, building coalitions, bringing people together is one of the subtle things that have happened, and I'm quite sure because of this, Charleston will continue to have these forums and to have conversations like this.
Mrs. Pinckney, there's obviously been a foundation established in your husband's honor. Would you like to tell some members of the audience who may not know much about it something of the work that's being done under your husband's name?
senatorpinckney.org, and it's just basically to the work that Clementa was doing. You know, things that he stood for. And so, you know, we're just about out trying to help people in education and, you know, healthcare, and to rally behind the things, those good things, any those people that we can help. Like, for example, there's one out there, the mobile health unit that we've been working hard on. The mobile unit itself has been purchased, but now we're looking for funds and trying to gather the funds to actually run it. The mobile unit would be one that would go into the rural areas where my husband represented, and to be a preventative way so that people, you know, a lot of people in the rural areas, they cannot make it to the hospital. You know, I grew up in the country, and so the hospital was not around the corner, you know, and so we were working hard and trying to make that a reality. And so, you know, like I said, and now with this, what just happened, the simple solution gun control, you know, that has been another added thing that we're working on. So it's just basically, so we're just basically trying to live out and to continue to work in honor of my husband, the things that he stood and believed for.
And of course, his district did and does experience some of the sharpest disparities in income levels, medical care, per pupil expenditure in schools.
Yes, definitely. Education, the schools aren't, all of the schools aren't adequate. You know, you have those that want to go to certain schools, and I think that's in a lot of areas. You kind of study which schools are doing a little bit better than others, but yeah, that is a problem, and that is something that he often worked on, along with healthcare issues and so forth. You know, he worked with people in jails, and so he was just about the people and trying to be a voice for the people.
Reverend Darby, it's been said that 11 o'clock on Sunday morning is the most segregated hour of the week. Probably still is.
Oh, yeah.
Should that concern us? And as I get wordier than I should, you know, I'm generally familiar with the work of the Charleston Area Justice Ministry. I had a very nice conversation with Reverend Middleton earlier this week, in which he was sharing with me that members of his congregation and Grace Episcopal were not meeting at 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, but did have a study group and much more regular contact with each other. The Christian faith obviously has been a connective tissue, segregated but connective, and would seem perhaps to be an underutilized resource to build some of these bridges that need to be built.
Yeah, I think Sunday morning will still be probably the most segregated time of the week, because in some cases, if we went into other folks' churches, we'd be absolutely horrified by what we saw going on. I think, though, that there are points of intersection that can be made. Justice ministry is one of those points. I was pleased, along with Father Dow Sanderson, to be the co-founder. And it's been interesting to see that evolve. It's a way for people to get involved, to do that across lines of denomination, actually across lines of faith, and to do that in ways that there's growth. When that began, we were able to identify community problems. After the Mother Emanuel tragedy, then it was not a matter of whether those problems involved race. It was a matter of which aspect of the racial problem in Charleston do we want to deal with. And so that is a positive attitude, and it also points up the fact that people of faith can gather together for advocacy as well as for service, because there's a difference. When I was Pastor Morris Brown, one of the presidents of the College of Charleston, asked if we wanted to help do something on a Habitat home for King Day, and I turned him down. And I explained to him that Martin King, the pastor, would have advocated doing something with that Habitat house. Martin King, the civil rights leader, would have asked, why do you have to build a Habitat house in America in the 21st century? That's advocacy.
Mayor Riley, so much. You know, also during this period of time, you and Chief Mullen, Deputy Chief Broughton, were instrumental in launching the Illumination Project. Would you like to speak briefly about the premise behind that and what it's accomplished?
Well, the credit of that goes to Chief Mullen, from whom you heard a little while ago, and we were very proud of the work that our police department had done, reaching out to our citizens and neighborhoods, and you know, programs like Camp Hope, which was also Chief Mullen's idea, which was the police department reaches out to kids, middle school kids in the inner city and on Johns Island, West Ashley, James Island, and have supervisors summer camps for these children that wouldn't be able to go to camps, and then the supervisors and the camp counselors are police officers, so they're developing relationships. You go to the graduation, and the kids are hugging the police officer and getting their plaque, and they've been out to you know, on the harbor and field trips they would never imagine. And so our police department was doing a number of those outreach things and connecting with neighborhood leaders and being engaged and all that. But Chief Mullen felt that there was the next step, a more holistic approach, which is the Illumination Project, and that is actually a national best practice, and there is being constructed the National Police Academy or some building in Washington. What is it, Chief? Do you know? Anyway, they will feature on a video the City of Charleston Illumination Project as a best national practice on how a police department and its officers become fully alert and engaged in understanding the citizenry and being so firmly in a position to withstand the untoward acts that we've seen in some police departments around the country. And it's really it's wonderful to see it happening. It's great. It's best practice.
If I can for a moment, I'd like to also say that one key component of Project Illumination, it provides dialogue with anyone who wants to have that dialogue. And as a result of that, we've made some changes in our department as a result of some suggestions from the community. And that's huge now in this country. When, you know, departments are facing criticism, we look at that criticism, and if it's something we need to do to better our organization, we do it. So it's certainly been successful with the dialogue we've had with our community, and we're in this for the long run. So we'll continue that dialogue, continue those listening sessions, and continue to listen to what anyone has to say about our organization.
Reverend Risher, you've been active too, I believe, have you not? Reverend Risher, Sharon, I know that you've been a very vocal advocate of tighter gun laws, I believe, among other things. Would you like to speak to that?
Yes, because of this tragedy, there are some of us that have been propelled into a world where we understand that violence happens in America. 93 people are killed every day. 8 children are killed every day because of irresponsibility of adults and their relationships with their guns. One thing I want to make clear, it is not about gun control. It is about gun law reform. It is about opening up a conversation that we have a hard time talking about. I will always carry the 9 with me as I go around this country, giving my personal feelings about gun violence prevention and trying to educate. I just ask you to give a good look at the relationship we as Americans have with our weapons, and to try to understand the pain that the 9 families and other families have gone through because of such violent acts. That's where
Amen.
I am.
And I think it's really respectfully, our duty, citizens of this community, and those who saw so vividly and heartbreakingly the results of a gun that shouldn't have been in possession of Dylan Roof, if the background check had been followed through. And I think we have a duty to work hard with our General Assembly and with the national legislature to strengthen these laws to protect our citizens. And that we owe duty to Senator Pinckney and his 8 prayerful brethren to stand up as Reverend Risher is doing and strengthen our gun laws in America.
Not all progress will come through governmental action.
It's a beginning.
You agreed very quickly with it there. But where that was going or attempting to go. But surely some can come through governmental action. And there are structural issues in economics, there are structural issues in housing, there are structural issues in many areas to include government and politics. So this might be best addressed to Reverend Darby and Mayor Riley. Over the last several decades, at each census, there has been redistricting, of course, that takes place as a normal matter of business. There are less kind words for that, such as gerrymandering. I believe Reverend Darby's referred to it as racial redistricting in some cases. And of course, what we're talking about is redrawing the electoral map so that it tends to produce people who have the most well-formed opinions, shall we say, on either side of the political spectrum. Do you have thoughts as to whether that's, how big of an impediment is it, if one at all, to progress?
Gerrymandering is a hindrance to progress, but it's not an overcomable hindrance. I don't think there's probably one congressional district in South Carolina where anyone could not be competitive if everyone got out and voted. The thing that keeps some sickening folk from going back into office is because some people do not understand that if they stay home, they are by proxy voting for somebody who might do them harm. I think that if people get out and vote and do that and vote for people with good sense and decency, then you can change America for the better.
Well, I might respectfully disagree somewhat with Reverend Darby. I do think that we've seen fewer really competitive House districts in our country, and I think that some additional initiative, whether it's some public input, citizen input, or something, but I think we do better when there is more valid, real competition. I agree with Reverend Darby. You got to get out and go to the polls and get behind people and work very hard, but sometimes the deck seems to be so severely stacked in favor of one party that it's harmful to democracy in America, I believe.
But when we can reshuffle the deck, it's helpful. I thought of something that Senator Campbell said, that there were enough votes in the legislature to change the Heritage Act. There's a simple cure for that. You vote some people out, you vote some other people in, you change the Heritage Act. You put it in the trash where it belongs.
We've gotten our red flashing light here. So, so what I'd like to do, quickly, Mrs. Pinckney, Reverend Risher, as a Baptist, a backsliding Baptist, my parents would have said, we believe that your husband and your mom are with us this evening. if they could step up and speak and offer, and offer maybe a couple of words of advice, what do you think they would want to tell us?
I believe my mom was always in the background, kind of, sort of. But I would think that she would say, "Thank you, Lord, for all that you have given me. Thank you for the opportunities that my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren will have because of the legacy that I will leave them."
Put me on the spot. Clementa, probably would say something like, continue the work, continue to fight, continue to make South Carolina good, continue to make America good.
I think we're out of time, but I would like to take the liberty of closing this session by sharing with you some of the words of the late Chaz Joyner of Coastal Carolina University, a great historian of our state, who in 2003, at the end of an essay entitled "How Far We Have Come, How Far We Still Have to Go," wrote, "Someday we're going to lay down the burden of race down by the riverside. Someday we shall overcome our racism and our complacency and our violence. Someday. But how soon is someday? Someday we shall together finally achieve the redeemed community. And when we do, the shared traditions that unite us will be among the symbols for which we are best known and among the symbols of which we South Carolinians will be most proud. But how soon is someday? How soon, my brothers and my sisters, depends on us." Thank you, audience. Thank you, panel.